Okay, welcome to, this is the third class in a series on Excel, Microsoft Excel, formulas and functions this week. This is Wichita Public Library. We appreciate you joining us. I'm being assisted by Brock Rhodes today. If you have any questions at any time during the class, please post your questions in the chat and either I will see it or Brock will bring it to my attention and I'll try to address those as they come up. And so today we're going to be talking about, first we'll talk about formulas and some simple math regarding the order of operations. That means whether you multiply or divide or add or subtract first in a function. So there's some rules that Excel follows, which you may have also learned in math class, whenever that might have been, eons ago for me. And then we'll look at functions. A function is a preset formula. And then that's pretty much going to be the focus in this PowerPoint. There's a list of some shortcuts and some other resources I'll be getting to later. So first, on the order of operations, all of your, if you have a keyboard with the keypad on the right side, separate from the QWERTY keyboard on the left, then you've got the operators around the edge of that. You've got the / is the divide button, and then you've got the multiply, and then on the corner is the minus sign. Then there's a large button with the plus sign. Those are all next to your numbers on the number pad if you have that on your keyboard. If you have a smaller keyboard, it may not include that on some of the smaller laptops. The only other one, and you won't really use it, the exponents button is the caret button, which is above the 6. So you would do Shift 6 for that. And that's to indicate exponents like x squared. The squared is the exponent, and you just put that caret symbol in front of the 2, and that would be squared, the squared symbol. So I'm going to jump into the spreadsheet in a second, but this is sort of, it'll be a little bit of review for those who came to the Excel Basics class. An Excel formula is a simple equation. And the thing about formulas and functions in Excel is that instead of having the equation at the beginning and then the equal sign and then the result, you start with the equal sign in Excel because you're saying this cell will equal whatever you type there. So in this first example, we have A1 plus A2 plus A3. If we want Excel to add those 3 cells, we have to start with the equal sign, say equals A1, A2 plus A3. So let's see. So in the second example here, this is actually a formula for the average of those 3 cells. And so basically you would take the sum of those 3 cells and then divide it by 3. So in this second example, the parentheses indicate that you should do the addition before you do the division. So let's come down here. Here's the order of operations is PEMDAS, and there's a handy acronym to remember it by, which is please excuse my dear Aunt Sally. So you always start with parentheses, and then you go to exponents. And then, and this is where most of what you do will come up. You have multiplication and division before you do addition and subtraction. So that would be in the absence of parentheses. So let's go over to our spreadsheet here. So if I'm gonna click on A7, I've got a list of numbers above that. And if I'm gonna type a formula, I have to start with the equal sign. And I'm gonna add these numbers, but I wanna add what's in these cells, actually, not just the numbers there. So that if we change the numbers, the formula should update automatically. So I'll click on A2 and then type my plus sign, and then click A3 rather, type plus, click A4 plus, click A5 plus, click A6, which has the number 5 in it. So Excel does this nifty thing where it, as you type in the, or click on, the address for the cell is colored the same color as the box around that cell. So we have A2 in blue, A3 is in red, and etc. Now, it's not going to calculate the formula until I hit enter. But you will notice that I also have the formula written up in what's called the formula bar. And so anything in the active cell is also going to show up here in the formula bar. And this is why it's called the formula bar, because when I hit enter and I click back on A7, you notice it gives the result in the spreadsheet, which is 15, but up in the formula bar, it shows what we indicated or typed in with the mouse and the keyboard. Let's see, I've got a comment. How to get the screen to show it. What's going on?
It seems fine on my end. I don't know exactly what Sharon can see, but I can see everything. I can see your...
You see my split screen?
Yeah, I see Excel on the left and I see PowerPoint on the right, and I can see the whole sheet.
Okay.
Cannot see a split screen.
Are you on a computer, Sharon? I'm not sure why you're not seeing.
If it's windowed and the window is too small, it might just be cropped in a funny way. I would just hit the square to make zoom full size. And then if you want to adjust it, go back to the windowed mode and reshape it.
Okay, let's see, getting back to this, we've got our formula listed here. And notice if we change any of these numbers, the result changes automatically as soon as we type that number and hit enter. So when you type a number in, it's not going to reflect the change until you hit enter or tab or arrow or click on another cell to, will make that change, solidify, or be remembered by the Excel. So in the Excel basics class, we also learned a shortcut for the for adding, which is the sum function. And the sum function is in the editing group. It's up here. It has this funny backwards E, which is a Greek letter epsilon, which is the mathematical symbol for sum. And when I select B7 and click on the Autosum button, it immediately guesses that I want to add up or sum the numbers directly, the cells directly above the active cell. And I hit enter, and we get the same result, the addition. Now, I want to point out the structure of this. The function is going to be the same in every function. Let me zoom in here. So we've got, always start with the equal sign, then we have the name of the function, and then we have parentheses. And inside the parentheses, we have one or more items, or what they call arguments. In this case, the item inside the parentheses is a range that goes from B2 to B6. The colon is the number that indicates a range that suggests that all the cells in between the two listed cells are part of the range as well as those two cells. And so again, if we change the numbers here, the sum in B7 automatically updates. And if you've got this open at home, you can play around with that and see. If I just go back to what it was, it updates it automatically as I type. So in the next cell, we're going to talk about address this order of operations more directly. So I'm going to just click on, oh, well, what do I have to start with to tell it it's a formula? Again, I have to start with the equal sign. If I don't hit the equals, clicking on a cell will not change, it'll just change the active cell. But after I type equals, clicking on the cell will put the address of that cell into the formula. So I'm going to click C2 rather, and say plus C3 divided by C5 minus C6. Let's see, I skipped C3. Well, that's okay. So the result here is going to change. If we have C2 and C4 added together before we divide by C5, then that's going to be a different result. If we follow the order of operations here, we're going to do the multiplication and division before the addition and subtraction. So the C4 divided by C5 will come first, and then we'll add C2 and subtract C6. So our current answer is minus 3.25. If I double click and put in some parentheses here, then that's going to change the result. And I can put parentheses here as well, if I want those to be subtracted before the division happens. Now I've got a different result. And so as a mnemonic, you can remember, please excuse my dear Aunt Sally. I will mention that whether you do multiplication and division are both in the same set. So you can do division before multiplication, and that's fine because they're inverses of each other. Multiplication and division is the same operation, just in different directions. So that's why they have the slashes here. Same with addition and subtraction. If you add one and subtract one, it doesn't matter which order you do those two things. The result is still 0. Okay. Now, so with the Autosum here, there's actually 2 buttons up here. If you look in the editing group where the Autosum lives, there's the Autosum itself, and then there's a drop-down menu. The little triangle indicates a drop-down menu. And let's try average this time. So these are other functions that will apply some different formulas, different calculations to the cells indicated. So I'm going to click average. And again, Excel guesses where the nearest adjacent group of cells are with numbers in them, and guesses correctly that these 5 cells above the active cell are the ones that we want. So I hit enter, and there's our average. And again, you can see the active or the function listed in the formula bar. So we can play around with this too in other ways. With the other choices in that drop down, count numbers is just how many numbers are there. So that's going to be 5. We know that's 5, but I'll click on it and just show you. So the count of the cells between D2 and D6 inclusive is 5. That's the count. Then the max and min are the maximum and the minimum numbers in that group. So max should bring back the same as the D5 here, the 76,000. Enter, and indeed it does. That's the maximum number in this range. And similarly with min, it's going to be, well, I need to make sure I've highlighted the correct cell. Make sure the active cell is the one where I want the formula to go. Go up and I select min, and this should be D6, which is minus 872, which it is. And again, if we change one of these numbers, the sum is going to change. The minimum won't change unless we change the minimum value. So if we go back to average and just take off a couple of figures on this entry, then average will change dramatically. I'm going to undo. Just to remind you, as I mentioned last time, your best friend in Microsoft Office is the undo button. And it's up here, it's a little arrow that curves around to the left. And when you mouse over it, it gives you this indication that the keyboard shortcut is Control+Z. So I can use Control, I'm going to hold down the Control button, tap Z, and it undoes the last thing I did. And now the redo button is now lit up, so I can redo the thing that I undid. So you can go forward or backward, basically, in the order of the things that you have done to the spreadsheet. So undo is your friend. I'm going to come back to our PowerPoint. There's some other slides here about the order of operations, which in this PowerPoint is in a PDF format in the Google Drive folder. So here's another look at the function of all functions. I mean, the structure of all functions, which starts with an equal sign, then there's a name, and it's traditionally in all caps, but it does not have to be in all caps. And then there's a pair of parentheses, always. And then there's one or more arguments, or as we'll see in a minute, there are some functions that don't have any arguments, but they still have parentheses because all functions have the same structure: equals, the name, and the parentheses. And then there may or may not be one or more items inside the parentheses, which are inputs, or as Excel calls them, arguments. And in this example, we have 3 arguments. We have cell A1, cell A2, and the range from B1 to B3. Those, in this example, those are the inputs or the arguments. It's going to add up all of the items listed. So a couple of functions, we'll get to this later. But so there's one function that's for today's date that has no inputs, but it does has the equal sign. It's the name today, and then an open and then a closed parentheses with nothing inside them. This function will return to today's date. Will return today's date. It's going to, I believe, use the time set on your computer. So it will reflect whatever the time is indicated by on your computer. And let's see, we'll get to some of these later. There's some logical functions we're gonna get to. And I'm gonna just minimize this. Here's some top 8 shortcuts. And let me just bring up. So now we're going to move on to the second spreadsheet. Just to review some terminology, the file as a whole is called a workbook, and each spreadsheet is called a worksheet. So in this workbook called Excel Formulas and Functions, the name is here at the top. We have 2 spreadsheets. We have one called Practice Formulas, which is the one we've been working with. And then we have one called Ice Cream Sales, which we're going to go to now. So you just switch sheets by clicking on the tab at the bottom here. And now we're going to work with a sales report from a fictional ice cream shop called Jen and Barry's Ice Cream. And this is a sales report. It's just starting out, so they only have 2 flavors right now, vanilla and chocolate. So first of all, we're going to fill in the start date for each week. We have the indicator for the first, we have the date of the first week. So we want to fill in the rest of the dates here for the 12 weeks that this report covers. So there's actually a couple of different ways to do this, but I'm going to show you a formula since we're talking about formulas and functions. Well, first, actually, let me show you. So the second week is going to start on the 8th, 7 days later. And I did the math in my mind. I added 7, and we're going to come back to that and do it that way explicitly. But for now, I'm just going to type in 1/8, and I have to indicate the year. Otherwise, it will assume the current year, but we don't want 2021. We want 2019. So I hit enter. Now I've got a pattern, and I can use autofill to extend this pattern. If I use autofill from here, then it's going to go day by day, but I want to go 7 days by 7 days. So let me undo that. In order for it to follow the pattern, I have to highlight both cells that show the pattern. Then I can autofill the rest. And you see it does it week by week. Yet effectively adding 7 days, which is what we did on the first 2. If you weren't at the other classes, the autofill is indicated by this little green rectangle, green square in the corner of the active cell. And when you mouse over it, it changes to the autofill cursor, which is the plus sign. So can we go through the date thing step by step? So let me show you the other way quick, and we'll spend a little more time on this. This is the key for the pattern is to highlight at least 2 cells that demonstrate the pattern, and then autofilling from there. And then it follows the pattern that's indicated by the first 2. The other way to do this is to create a formula. So what do I start with when I'm creating a formula or a function? Always start with equals. So type equals, and then I'm going to add 7 to the first date. So I'm going to click on B4, which is where my first date is located. And I'm going to type plus, and I'm going to type 7. So my formula is simply equals B4 plus 7. I'm taking the date January 1st, 2019, and I'm adding 7. So this works because Excel treats days as integers. So when you add 7 to a date, you get a week later of the same. So if it was a Monday, it's the next Monday. So I'm going to go ahead and hit enter to save that value. And you'll see from January 1st, it added 7 to get January 8th. Now I can autofill. This time I'm autofilling the formula to each one. So it's going to, whoops, I just clicked a button by mistake. I'm going to hit the escape button to clear that out because I don't want to mess up my formula. if you're in the middle of a formula and you click somewhere, it's going to mess up your formula. It's going to add that cell address to the formula. So here we are. We've got B5 has the formula. We're going to copy that formula down using the autofill handle and the autofill cursor. And I clicked and dragged. Now I'm going to let go. And this time we've got, if I click on a random cell in this group, you can see in the address bar up here, it's just taking the current cell and adding 7, or the previous cell and adding 7. So this is what we call a relative reference, which is why we were able to copy it through to all of the other cells. So basically what it copied was not the formula. It didn't say B4 plus B7 all the way down. If I click down at the end here, it said B14 plus 7 because it based it on the previous cell. So it's a relative reference, meaning it didn't copy B4 literally into every cell. It understood the formula to say, take the previous cell above, or go one cell up and then add 7 to it and put that value in this cell. And it just repeated that all the way down. So this is important today because we're going to look at absolute references in a moment. So in Excel, we have two kinds of references, like absolute and relative. And so now we're going to move on to the vanilla revenue column. And let me see, I'm going to change, you can't see the revenue word, so I'm going to wrap the text for these cells here. When I select these cells and come up here in the alignment group, there's a button called wrap text. And what that does is it wraps extra long text into multiple lines so you can see all of it. Effectively, if there's too much to fit on one line, then it will change the width of that row to fit that text. So I'm going to click wrap text. And it's not changing. Why isn't it? Well, I can always change it myself manually. So what I thought would happen was it's already wrapping text. So, and I undo that, and we have vanilla quantity, vanilla revenue, chocolate quantity, and chocolate revenue. I'm gonna undo those and just resize this row. So notice when I move the cursor off to the side, outside of the spreadsheet to these numbers, it's either doing an arrow to indicate that row, that whole row, or I get the resize cursor, which is the horizontal line with an arrows pointing up and down. That's the resize row cursor. And I'm going to pull it down, make it about double the size. So now we can see the headings here. So that gets us to where we were trying to go, which is the vanilla revenue formula. So we have a quantity of vanilla here in column C. And over on the right, we have the price for vanilla and chocolate. So the revenue for the formula, or the formula for the vanilla revenue starts with, guess what? Equals, always equals to start. Then I'm going to take the quantity and multiply. The multiply button is the asterisk, and I'm using the asterisk on the keypad to the right. You can also use Shift 8 to get the asterisk. It's the same symbol. And then I'm going to select the vanilla, the price of vanilla, which is in I4. And I'm clicking on that, and it puts I4 in the cell in the formula. So my formula is C4 times I4. And you can see the color coding. C4 is in blue. That's my quantity of vanilla. I4 is in red. That is the price of each vanilla ice cream scoop or cone. So I'm going to hit enter, and my my format is already set to accounting. So it's given me the $ and the decimal places. Now, to demonstrate the difference between relative and absolute references, I'm going to copy this formula down because I want to see I want to change the quantity based on the row. But I don't want to change the price of vanilla based on the row. I need the price of vanilla to stay I4 for everyone. And so you're going to see what happens if I autofill this down and let go. Something didn't work right. As you can see, I've got a bunch of blank values, which can't be right. And here in D6, it is saying there's some kind of error. This is indicates an error. It's a value error. And there's a little, when I highlight that active cell and there's an error, there's a little exclamation mark on a sign next to it that tells me what the error is. This is error in value. And if I double click there, you can see maybe why we're getting an error. It says C6 times I6. C6 is 250. I6 is the word total. So it's trying to multiply a number by some text, and it's saying you can't do that. That's an error. So if we go back up to D4 and look at our original formula, let me double click to get the color coding, and we can see maybe what's happening. So as I moved down, it went from C4 to C5, C6, C7. Let's see, if I come down here, C12 in row 12, that part of the formula is correct. But the other part, the I wanted it to be I4, which is the price of vanilla, but it's made a relative reference and put in the next row for the I value in the I column. But I don't want that. So the way that we do this is go up to my formula, and for I4, I want to tell Excel that I want an absolute reference. In other words, I want I4 to be multiplied by the different rows of column C. So the way that works is you put in a $ in front of the row number and the column letter. So I've got $I, $4, which says always go back to I4 for even when you copy this formula. And I'll show you this again. Now, if we copy it, our formula works. We've got, if I double click on one of these down here, it's multiplying the quantity of vanilla for that week by the price of vanilla. So my numbers are good. And you can see it's, so when you copied it down with the autofill, C11 moved down to the next row, reflects the row. So we're in row 11, so that's C11. But I4 stayed the same because we wanted a absolute reference for I4, meaning it always goes to I4, even when we copy the cell to a different, copy the formula to a different cell. Let's see. Yeah, I is referring to column I, as in, you know, HIJK. We've got column I. So let's go on to, now we're going to just fill in the revenue for chocolate. And again, for a formula or a function, we start with z equals quantity of chocolate. I'm going to click on E4. Now you can type, as I mentioned in the other class, you can type out the cell reference, but it's easier to avoid mistakes if you click on the cell that you want to reference rather than typing it, because we're all human. We're going to make typos when we type. And this, you can always double check your formula by double clicking on it and see the highlighted cells that come up. So E4, I'm going to multiply that by the price of chocolate, which is I5. But I need to change that to an absolute reference. Now there's another shortcut for converting a reference from an absolute to a reference relative to an absolute reference. And that is the button, the function button, F4. When I tap, I've got my cursor next to the I5 cell reference. If I hit F4, it immediately adds dollar signs in front of the I and in front of the 5 to create an absolute reference. If I keep hitting F5, it goes through the other versions of absolute and relative references. So you can have an absolute reference to the column and a relative reference to the row, which just confuses me as well. You're probably confused, but don't worry about it. Just keep hitting F4 until it gets to the one that you want. Basically, we're going from no dollar signs to $2 signs to $1 sign in front of the row to $1 sign in front of the column, and then back to no dollar signs. So long story short, if I want to make that an absolute reference, instead of going in to type in the dollar sign, I can just keep my mouse next to that cell reference and tap F4, and it will add the dollar signs. And I hit enter. There's my revenue for chocolate, multiplying the chocolate quantity times the price of chocolate. This time I'm going to autofill that. Here's something else that might blow your mind. If you double click the autofill cursor, it automatically fills in the whole column down to the, it recognizes where you have data and it's going to stop where the data stops, which is row 15. So I'm going to undo that and just show you again because it's so cool. This is the Autofill shortcut, the shortcut of the shortcut. The double click, just like when we double clicked the resize cursor to resize to the largest element in that row, in that column, this double click on the autofill cursor lets me fill in all the remaining rows. And let's just double check. I'm going to double click on one of these and make sure the formula is working like we want it to. It's multiplying the quantity of chocolate in week 6 by the price of chocolate. Okay, so we're good. Now, this section over here to the right of our table, we have, it's called a what's it called? It's called a dashboard. That's what the word I'm looking for. This is a dashboard. It's a summary of our data. So we want to fill in the rest of these grayed out fields with some values to reflect our data on the left. So we have a quantity sold, and then we have a revenue of price times quantity. And here, how would you create a formula that calculates the total revenue from vanilla sales? No, actually, we're not there yet. Sorry, we're not at K, we're in J. So here, the quantity sold, I want to basically add up all of the vanilla quantity in column C. I'm going to add up column C values for the quantities of vanilla sold in this quarter, in this period. So I'm going to use the autofill. I mean, not the autofill. I'm going to use the Autosum. And so up here on the ribbon in the editing group is my Autosum. I'm going to click that. So when you select Autosum, Excel tries to guess where your data is that you want it. And it's going to look in 2 places. It's going to look at the cells adjacent above the active cell first. And if there's no numbers there, it's going to look in the adjacent cells to the left of the active cell and to find any numbers there. So right now, it didn't find numbers when it looked up. It looked to the left and said, oh, there's a number, let's add that. The fact is, as soon as I clicked Autosum, the cells within the argument or input for that function is highlighted, meaning that I can select any cells and it will replace that argument or input with what I want. When I want the quantity of vanilla in these 12 weeks, and I just clicked and dragged to highlight those, and now I have the sum C4 to C15, that range, the range from C4 to C15. And notice under right below the sum, it gives me a little kind of cheat sheet of the structure of the sum function, which has the sum parentheses, and then it has one or more arguments or inputs. And you notice it has number 1, comma, number 2, comma, dot, dot, dot. So you can just keep adding commas to add more and more. We're going to get to, Excel can give you a lot of help with your functions, which we'll get to later. So I'm going to hit enter and double click back on here to make sure it's doing what we want it to. I've got the sum of the range from C4 to C15, which is the quantity of vanilla from week 1 to week 12. And that is correct. That's what I want. to be in my quantity sold for this range. Now, can we autofill this down? I don't think we can because our data is way over here and we'll just have to redo it. So if I did autofill, then it just moved that down, which is not what I want. So I'm gonna undo or escape and then delete and type in a formula that will do what we want, which is equals the price. No, sorry. Autosum. I keep getting ahead of myself. I can just click on Autosum and then let's try it again. Click on Autosum, select the quantity of chocolate. This is going to be in column E. Select my range, hit enter. And now for the quantity sold, I can use Autosum. And this time Excel, oh look, it guessed to the left. I wonder why it did that. I can just select the cells above, hit enter. Let's double click and see. It's displaying a little funny, but I think it's what we want. If I click up here in this formula bar, that's the best place to check your formula. It shows me that I'm adding the quantity, the total quantity sold in our time period. So that's good. Now, for the revenue, it's going to be the quantity sold times the price. But I have another option for the revenue here because I've got revenue lists over here. So there's, we've got two different options here for our total revenue for vanilla and chocolate ice cream. Okay, the first one, it'll be a simple formula. The price times quantity should give us the revenue. We did a similar calculation over here though. If you remember, I've got revenue for each week. So the other option is to add up all of these totals in column D. Just as we added column C for the quantity of vanilla in this cell, we can come here and do an Autosum for the revenue column, or column D for vanilla. And that gives me a total. Let's see, for the chocolate, we can use the other way, which is I'm going to just type a formula equals 370, or J5, the total quantity of chocolate sold, times, I'm going to use the shift 8, the price, which is $4. But I'm clicking on I5 for the price. So I've got J5 times I5, and enter. And I've got a pretty similar total, but I know that this quantity, I'm basing on the price of chocolate, and the quantity here is coming from the quantity of chocolate. So the data is definitely coming from the chocolate side numbers and not the vanilla. They're almost the same. And then, so we've got two different ways of summarizing our data in this case. We used Autosum for the vanilla and a simple formula for the chocolate. Either way, our total row will be easy. We're going to do the Autosum And so I'm highlighting the two cells that I want to add, to enter. So that's a summary of our Autosum function and simple formulas, and using absolute versus reference versus relative versus absolute values for formulas values. So next we have, I'm going to introduce another kind of function, which is called a logical function, which we're going to do some if function statements. In programming, you might have heard of if-then statements. So you're saying, if a condition is such, then I'll do this. Otherwise, I'll do that. And that is basic structure for the if function. So in this function, we're going to compare our revenue goal with our actual revenue for vanilla and chocolate. So we had goals for chocolate and vanilla of $12,000 revenue for these 12 weeks. And so we're going to create a function, an if function in M4. So in addition to the home ribbon, we have home tab on the ribbon. We have several other tabs, and one of them is the formula tab, and that gives us control over, or an interface to add all different kinds of functions and look at, to preview a variety of things. There's a whole category of logical functions there, and here's just some of them. I'm going to go back to the home tab because there's also another shortcut, sort of. Without switching tabs, I can go to the drop-down menu next to Autosum and go to More Functions. And that brings up the Insert Function dialog. And it's going to show the most common functions. And one of those is the if function. I'm going to select that from the list here. I can also do a search up above here. It says type a brief description of what you want to do, and then click go. I'm going to backspace and just type if and go. Then those are some if functions. If comes at the top. If I, let's see, I'm going to cancel and go back to my more functions list. So these are the most common ones. I can also just select if from that list. And down below, in the insert function dialog box, once you select a function, it tells you what that function does. The if function checks whether a condition is met and returns one value if it's true and another value if it's false. And here's the structure. It gives you the structure of that function. So it has, of course, the function name and then parentheses. So what's inside the parentheses? That's what it tells you here. And it looks really confusing, but it's not that confusing if you can kind of think of it clearly. So the first value is the logical test. The second value is the value if true. The third value is the value if false. So I'm going to click OK, And then Excel is going to walk me through this function. So you see in M4, it's got the if function there with the parentheses. We just have to fill in the values, but it's going to walk me through those here to make it easy. So what's my logical test? I want to know if the revenue goal was met. So is K4 greater than L4? Is our revenue greater than the revenue goal? So I can click on the cells. I want to say K4. Is K4 greater than? Use the greater than symbol above the period on my keyboard. And then I'm going to click on L4. So is my revenue greater than my revenue goal? That's my logical test. And if it's true, I want it to display the word yes. Now, Excel really only understands numbers. Text doesn't mean anything to it. So we have to put our text in quotes. Excel refers to this as a text string. Words are just text strings. They don't mean anything to Excel. So we have to put it in quotes. That's the value if true. Yes, the goal was met. Our revenue was greater than our goal. If the revenue was not greater than the goal, then I want it to indicate no. So I put that in quotes as well because I want it to display yes or no. And then I click OK. And what's our result in M4? It's yes. And if we look on the address in the formula bar, we can see our formula. If, parentheses, K4 is greater than L4, comma, yes, comma, no. First is the logical test. Is the revenue greater than the revenue goal? K4 greater than L4. If it is, then our goal was met and we want it to say yes. If it wasn't, we want it to say no. So I'm going to hit enter to save that. And this time, can I autofill this down? And it looks like I can. If I'm going to double click on the second one, and yes, because I'm just going from one row to the next row. All my data is in the same row, so I can copy it down. Relative references are fine because each formula only refers to elements in that same row, so I can use relative references. If it was a different row and column, then I might need to use an absolute reference. But in this case, because it's the same row, relative references will work. And I can actually even go down to autofill it down to the total row because that's the same things apply. You may notice I lost some of my formatting by copying because well, let me see, if I fill without formatting, then let's see, undo. I'm gonna autofill, but say fill without formatting. Now I saved my formatting. So I lost the formatting over here too, but I won't worry about that today. So just to test that these formulas are really working, I'm gonna change some values over here. Let's say that in the 12th week, the freezer broke and we lost all of our stock. So I'm going to put in 0 for those rows. And notice what's changed. Our goal for vanilla was not met because the difference of taking off that 1 week of revenue made our revenue below $12,000. So the goal was not met. Whereas the chocolate did meet the goal, even without that last week. Let me just double check my chocolate revenue here. And this chocolate quantity sold. Oh, I see what happened. This is interesting. So you notice I changed the value of the revenue for each, but the quantity of chocolate still shows 175. That's why the chocolate is saying the goal is still met. I have to change the quantity here to 0. And then it says, no, the goal was not met. That's why it didn't change. Because I had the different formulas, for vanilla, I added the quantities. Or no, for the vanilla, I added the revenue here. And for the chocolate, I multiplied the revenue based on the quantity here. So I have, so anyway, my formulas are working. My logical test worked when I changed the quantity and the revenue of my vanilla and chocolate. The revenue goal is not met. Are there any questions about this before we move on? So that was a logical test function rather. And now we have one last type of formula to look at. And this is, we have an injury report in our dashboard. And the first field here is a slot for today's date. I mentioned this earlier. The function to return today's date is the today function. And I'm just going to type it out, equals today. I've spelled it. I typed it out, even though typing is trouble, as one instructor said that I saw on a video. And then I do open and close parentheses. Notice I didn't put it in capital letters, even though traditionally it is. I'm just going to see if it works. I hit enter and look at that. There is today's date, the 17th of March, 2021. Now the formula here, the idea of this is, here's today's date. The last reported injury was December 1st, 2019. Now we want to know how many days have there been since the last injury? How many days without injury? So to find, I have the last reported injury date and I have today's date. I need to, so if these dates are integers, I need to subtract the last reported injury from today's date to find out the number of days since that date. Okay, so type equals, always start with equals for a formula. And I'm going to take today's date minus the last reported injury and then hit enter. It's been a long time since the last injury. Let me update this. Let's say we had an injury on, let's change this to 2020. So it's still been a good a couple of months, so 106 days. Now this last slot. I'm going to use a simple if function to specify whether or not how good we're doing. And let's say, and then the example they give, they say 60 days is a good length of time to not have an injury. So if the days without injury is less than 60 or greater than 60, then we've done a good job. If not, then we need to improve. So of course, this is the manager speaking. He's kind of a stickler for protocol. So we're going to say if, I'm going to type it, I'm going to use capitals just because it looks better. And now for my if, you notice it fills in the values that we need to define. First is the logical test, then the value if true, and then the value if false. The logical test is, is the days without injury greater than 60? So the days without injury, I'm going to click. Oh, it's not letting me click on that. So I'll have to type it in. Not sure why it's doing that. It's like covering up the cell above it. So I can type it. I just have to make sure I get the right one. P6. If P6 is greater than 60. I just have to double check the greater than. If it points to the right, it's greater than. If it points to the left, it's less than. That was always the way I remembered it. Because I'm right-handed too. So if P6 is greater than 60, then I want to say good job. He's kind of a stickler, so he doesn't say great job. He says good job, because anyway. If not, well, that's not good. Not good. And I put those in quotes because Excel doesn't understand text. Close parentheses and hit enter. Good job. It's been more than 60 days without injury. So a little review. Notice that when I double click on today's date, the today function, it's replaced my lowercase with uppercase. So it's supposed to be uppercase, but you can get away without it. It'll fix it for you. And then I have the last reported injury, December 1st, 2020. The days without injury, I subtracted the last reported injury from today's date. P4 minus P5. And then my conditional or if function states, if the days without injury is greater than 60, say good job. If not, say not good. Okay, I have a question. What is the formula for days without injury? Well, let's look at it again. I've got today's date and I've got the last reported injury. Okay, got it. The difference shows the days without injury. Okay. I don't know that I have time. See the other. Yeah, I'll show you this other one. So I'm going to bring up the auto inventory. Okay, has a question from Amanda. When you save the spreadsheet and open it tomorrow, will it change today's date to 3/18? That's a very good question. And the answer is it will change. So if I open this spreadsheet tomorrow, today's date will show 3/18 because that will be the date that might indicated on my computer. I think if the date and time on my computer are not accurate, then Excel won't be accurate in those determinations. But because I think it does base it on the official time according to the computer that you're on. But it does change. So that's very handy, really. So you would never have to edit that formula. Each time you open it, it will automatically insert the current date. So this is an auto inventory. And I'm just going to show, I'm going to create a dashboard. The older lesson version of this lesson that Denver Public did used this spreadsheet exclusively. Well, see, they had a practice spreadsheet. If you look down below, there's another practice spreadsheet where they did some of the basic functions. Had some just rows of numbers to add up or subtract or multiply. And then their auto inventory they used for the absolute and relative cell references. But I'm going to show, so we talked about the sum and we talked about the if function. Now we're going to combine the two. So there's a function called sum if. And what it's going to do is it's going to look at one. We've got a spreadsheet that shows the brand, the year, the type, the model, the price, and the date received of vehicles. So we've got Toyotas and Fords from 2019 and 2020. And then we have three types, which is truck, car, or SUV. And then there's the specific models. We have a Toyota Tundra, Ford Focus, etc. And then we have some prices. And we have a date received. Now, what I want to do is I want to know what is the value of all of the cars on the lot. So that's tricky to figure out, but we can set Excel up to just tell us automatically. So I'm gonna go into H1, and again, this is the auto inventory workbook on the auto inventory spreadsheet. I'm gonna put in say dashboard, and I'll bold that and then hit enter. And then I'm going to say, let's see, actually, let's say inventory dashboard. So I want to say how much, I've got cars, hit enter to go down, trucks. So I'm going to say car. I don't want to make it, I got to keep it simple. Car, truck, or SUV. So I got my car inventory or SUV, truck inventory. So let's move this down. I'm going to just drag that down here and we'll say value. So I'm going to create a formula that will look up each value in column C. It's going to look in column C. And if it's a car, I'm going to add column E, add the price of that car, and then total them all up. I'm going to go up to the formula bar tab on the and click on the insert function button. That's pretty much the same as the more functions under the Autosum on the home tab, formula tab, insert function. And there's if and there's sum. I'm going to type sum if, hit go, and there's my sum if. And the structure of my inputs is going to be the range, comma, criteria, comma, sum range. And it says the description adds the cells specified by a given condition or criteria. I'm going to click OK. And I've got this nifty pop-up that helps me, walks me through. It's going to fill in the values separated by commas in the formula. So the range, and this little button that there's like a red arrow on a blue spreadsheet background is basically what that is, if you can see it. That lets me select cells here and it will put in the values here. I think I can just click on it too. So the range I want to look up is the type. I want to know what type. Now I'm selecting and I'm going to click and keep going down to the bottom of that row column and let go. My criteria is car, and I have to put that in parentheses. So I'm going to look for the word car in column C. That's what that's saying. And if it does say car, then I'm going to add column E. So I need to go over here, and I'm just going to go from the bottom since I'm there and scroll, drag it up. So if it's a car, go to the price and add that to the total and click OK. And there's a value. Let me double click so you can see the visual representation of what's happening. The range I'm looking at is column C, C2 to C47. The criteria is the word car. I'm looking for car. And the sum range is column E. The sum range is actually optional. That's why it's in brackets here. And the reason for that is that sometimes if the initial range that you're looking at has numbers, then it can add those numbers. So like it could say, if that number is greater than 60, then add it up. So that would give me, the sum if would be all the values greater than 60 added up together. But in this case, the sum range is separate from the type, the initial range, which is where I'm judging the criteria. So I'm taking the value, if it says, if it's a car, I'm going to add that value to this sum. And actually, the reason I put the word car over here is because there's a simpler way. If I highlight car in quotes and delete that, and then click on H3, H3 has the word car. So it's going to give the same result. But the advantage is when I autofill this down, I can use the H3 as a relative reference and fill in truck and SUV for the next two. But in order to do that, I have to make these ranges absolute references. So again, I click next to the C2 to C47 range. I tap F4. And I have to go to each cell, make that an absolute reference. And the same with the, whoops. I did the wrong one. Okay, E2, I need to be $E2, $E47. Now I've got absolute references to the columns and a relative reference to the type of vehicle. Hit enter. Now I can autofill this down, and I've got the same range as absolutely referenced for type and price, and then a relative reference for my type of vehicle. The only thing left is to change the format of this to an accounting. And now I've got dollar values for each of my types of car. So that's the sum if function with, and it looks, what a god awful mess it looks like, but it's just absolute references to two columns. And all the dollar signs make it look kind of messy. But the color coding kind of gives you the look of the land, the lay of the land here. Okay, let's go back to the spreadsheet, or so one of the Excel shortcuts that I've listed here is the F4 button, which is the absolute versus relative toggle between absolute and relative formats. So A1, $A, $1, $A1, A, $1. Those are the four things that it toggles through. And then Control Z is your undo shortcut. See also the double click and the fill handle. Those are great shortcuts. There's a shortcut for today's date, which is Control plus semicolon. There's a shortcut for Autosum, which is Alt plus the equal sign. Please take a moment to fill out the evaluation that Brock has posted in the link, or in the chat. I've also got some links to some other resources that we have here at the library. There's a set of DVDs for Excel 16 called Discover Microsoft Excel. And these links here are to the catalog, the call number listed here. And then there's a couple of books on formulas and functions that we have. There's one of them for dummies, and there's one in Easy Steps is a good series as well that shows nice screenshots of those. And again, there is the GCF Learn Free. The lessons that we covered today on formulas and functions are lessons 13 through 16 in GCF Learn Free. That will give you a good alternate view of the same material. I've also just included a couple of websites that have information on different Excel things. These are just like tips and tutorials. Go back, here's the library reference sheet. So all of the technology how-to stuff is in call number 005. Microsoft Excel is 005.5. And then the last three letters are the beginning of the author's last name for those materials. Let me just, I'll click through on this one for the Discover Microsoft Excel. Let's see if it doesn't bog down the computer too much. Should open a new window. Oh, it's going to take forever. So there's one more class in this series. If you're not already signed up, please sign up for the next week's class. It's going to be on pivot tables and on charts and graphs. Pivot tables are really cool. They let you analyze data in all kinds of ways. It's like magic. It'll be fun. And so let's just freeze it up, isn't it? Okay. Well, there it is. Here's the listings for Discover Excel. So there's 4 DVDs, and you can see in the holdings there at the Advanced Learning Library, which I've abbreviated ALL. These have copies also at the Walters branch, these books. One of them, I think, had something checked out. And there's the other Excels. You can always give us a call, 261-8500, for one-on-one help. We call it Book a Librarian. You can ask for me or for Brock by name. There's several tech trainers here. You can just ask for your help, and we'll probably take your information, and one of us will get back to you. So thank you for attending, and we'll see you next week.